It was November of 1960 in Alhausen, southern Germany. Forensic experts were digging into the earth of an unmarked grave. When they opened the coffin, they found a skeleton someone had forced inside. The bones out of place, the jaw broken, the body bent as if the lid had been shut in a hurry. 15 years after the end of the war, the man historians called the cruelest in the entire SS had no headstone, no trial, no death certificate anyone accepted. Poland was still looking for him for 30,000 murders, and the whole world swore it had seen him alive. We are talking about the infamous Nazi Oskar Dirlewanger. And stay until the end, because this video tells you what the experts found inside that coffin, detail by detail. From crime to command, the unlikely path. 1895, Würzburg, Bavaria. Oskar Paul Dirlewanger was born into a German middle-class family, the son of a bank employee. He had a comfortable childhood and access to a good education. Nothing in his early years suggested the monster he would later become. The First World War changed him. Military records confirm his service on the Western Front between 1914 and 1918. Dirlewanger was wounded 6 times and awarded the Iron Cross, first and second class. But in the trenches, something broke. Witnesses reported his disturbing enthusiasm for hand-to-hand combat and extreme violence. After the armistice, he earned a doctorate in political science from the University of Frankfurt in 1922. His dissertation dealt with racial theories and social Darwinism, ideas that would later serve to justify his crimes. Even so, his academic career never prospered. The court case. German court records document his first major scandal. Oskar Dirlewanger was convicted in a serious scandal involving a 14-year-old and sentenced to 2 years in prison. That should have been the end of any future in the Reich. But Dirlewanger had influential allies. Gottlob Berger, an SS officer and a friend since the First World War, interceded with Heinrich Himmler. As a form of redemption, Dirlewanger was sent to the Spanish Civil War in 1936, fighting with the Condor Legion on Franco's side. Reports from the Spanish campaign contained serious accusations and a deeply compromised record. Wehrmacht officers requested his removal, but in 1939, he returned to Germany as a decorated hero. Why would the Nazi regime take back a man with such a record? What did Himmler see in Oskar Dirlewanger that made him overlook everything and allow him not only to return to service, but to create his own elite unit? The formation of a unit from hell. June 1940, Sachsenhausen concentration camp, Germany. Heinrich Himmler approved a radical experiment, the creation of a military unit made up of convicted German poachers and criminals. The logic was simple and perverse. Men used to killing stealthily would be effective against Soviet partisans. Command was given to Oskar Dirlewanger. SS documents captured by the Allies and now preserved in the German Federal Archives detail the initial recruitment. 55 convicts taken from prisons and concentration camps formed the core of the Special Dirlewanger Unit, the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger. In return, they were promised redemption through combat. The unit, however, quickly turned into something darker. In 1942, after the first operations in Poland and Belarus, the recruitment criteria expanded drastically. SS administrative records indicate the incorporation of common criminals, soldiers convicted of military offenses, sexual and violent criminals, foreign collaborators accused of crimes, and even Waffen-SS volunteers rejected by other units for improper conduct. They were not soldiers. They were demons in uniform, a Wehrmacht officer reported after the war. The testimony appears in the files of the Nuremberg Tribunal. In 1943, the unit had already become a full battalion. In 1944, it was officially designated the 36th Waffen-Grenadier Division of the SS. At its peak, it brought together about 4,000 men, a number that does not reveal the brutal turnover, marked by losses so constant that they required continuous replacements. Dirlewanger's methods, as described in reports by SS officers, were every bit as violent as his operations. Cruelty was encouraged and rewarded. Any sign of compassion was punished. Under his command, the unit ceased to be a military detachment and became an armed gang, legally authorized to kill. But what drove men, even criminals, to follow him into ever greater atrocities? How did Dirlewanger maintain control over a force made up of the Reich's most violent elements? And where would this unit be sent first? Terror in the occupied territories. 1942. The forests of Belarus. The Dirlewanger Brigade began its anti-partisan operations in the occupied Soviet territories. Operational SS reports found in German archives after the war reveal not military operations, but systematic massacres of civilians. A directive signed by Dirlewanger in March 1942 ordered, "Every village suspected of sheltering partisans is to be completely destroyed. All inhabitants are to be treated as enemy combatants." In practice, this meant the extermination of entire populations. The unit reports themselves recorded alarming numbers. In a single 2-week operation in June 1942, the brigade claimed to have eliminated 1,250 partisans and sympathizers. Later investigations, however, showed that the victims included hundreds of unarmed women, children, and elderly people. Historian Christian Gerlach, drawing on Soviet and German archives, identified the Dirlewanger Brigade as responsible for some of the worst crimes of the occupation of Belarus, estimating that tens of thousands of civilians were murdered. A Belarusian survivor, interviewed by Soviet investigators in 1944, described the recurring pattern of the raids. They arrived at dawn, asked nothing, locked everyone in the church, and set it on fire. Anyone who tried to flee was shot. Post-war court documents reveal that entire villages were used for training. Civilians were kept alive for interrogation, torture, and execution. Children were not spared. Reports from visiting German officers also confirmed that Oskar Dirlewanger encouraged and took part in systematic sexual violence, turning every operation into a scene of mass rape before the executions. Why did other German officers, even those hardened by the Eastern Front, say they were shocked by the Dirlewanger Brigade? What made its atrocities intolerable even by SS standards? And where would the setting of its most infamous crime be? What do you think of the content? Do you like this kind of video? Then comment, "I want more stories." That encourages us to bring you more historical topics and also helps the video's engagement, okay? Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell so you'll be notified as soon as we post something new, and leave a like so our videos keep being recommended to you. Warsaw. The Wola Massacre. August 1944. Warsaw, occupied Poland. After years of German rule, the city was seething with tension and hope. The Warsaw Uprising had begun. With the Soviet army advancing from the east, the Polish resistance launched a desperate insurrection to liberate the capital before the Russians arrived. It was an almost suicidal gamble. The Nazi response, however, would go beyond every known limit of violence. Heinrich Himmler ordered that Warsaw be wiped off the face of the earth. To lead the initial repression, he chose Oskar Dirlewanger and his brigade. German military reports record the unit's arrival on the 5th of August 1944, with the mission of pacifying the Wola district, a euphemism for the massacre that would follow. The following days would go down in history as the Wola Massacre, one of the most brutal war crimes of the Second World War. Polish post-war investigations estimate that between 40,000 and 50,000 civilians were murdered in just 3 days, revealing the almost unimaginable scale of the slaughter. John Haussmann, who was 16 at the time, said in testimony preserved by the Institute of National Remembrance, "They went from house to house. It did not matter whether it was a man, a woman, a child, or an old person. Everyone was lined up and shot. The pits were dug afterward, while the bodies were still warm. Captured German documents include reports from the Dirlewanger Brigade itself, written in cold, bureaucratic language. August 6th, 1,500 hostile residents eliminated on Volska Street. August 7th, hospital evacuated and 800 patients and medical staff treated as combatants. Behind those words was the deliberate execution of defenseless civilians. A report by General Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, the commander of the suppression, describes attempts to restrain the unit. The Dirlewanger Brigade is completely out of control. Your methods are unacceptable, even under the current circumstances. A warning coming from a man responsible for mass killings reveals the degree of sadism involved. Survivors reported extreme scenes: babies thrown against walls, hospitals set on fire with patients inside, women raped before being executed. The brigade turned entire streets into slaughterhouses. Van Dye, who hid in a cellar during the massacre, testified in 1945. For 3 days we heard nothing but screams and gunfire. When we came out, the streets were covered with piled-up bodies. The smell was unbearable. In the face of this violence, questions remain. Why did the massacre continue even in the face of internal protests? How did German soldiers react when they witnessed those actions? And in the end, what was Oskar Dirlewanger's fate when the war came to an end? The collapse and the mysterious death. In April of 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. The Soviet army was surrounding Berlin, while American and British forces advanced from the west, breaking through the last German defenses. The Dirlewanger Brigade, reduced to a shadow of what it had once been, was in total disintegration after months of brutal fighting. Military records indicate that Dirlewanger was wounded in early 1945, when a Soviet grenade exploded near him during defensive operations in Slovakia. The shrapnel put him out of action and led to his evacuation. From that point on, he remained away from the front line, weakened and physically unstable. In June of 1945, weeks after Germany's surrender, Dirlewanger was captured by French forces near Altshausen in southern Germany. Documents record that he tried to conceal his identity by using a false name and blending in among civilian refugees. It is at this point that the narrative fragments. The official French version states that he died in the prisoner camp in Altshausen on the 5th or 7th of June 1945, supposedly of natural causes related to his war wounds. Testimony, however, recounts a different version. Guards and Polish prisoners claimed that after his identity was discovered, especially by survivors from Warsaw, Dirlewanger was beaten to death in a direct act of revenge for the atrocities committed in Wola. Later French documents, cited by historians such as Christian Ingrao, suggest that the authorities may have allowed this prisoner's justice to run its course, avoiding a formal trial. After his death, Oskar Dirlewanger was quietly buried in an unmarked grave in Altshausen. The official account remained unclear for decades. Some records mention a heart attack, while others refer to complications from his wounds. Rumors of a fatal beating never disappeared. By all appearances, the truth was lost among incomplete documents and silenced witnesses. Why did the French authorities fail to document his death precisely? Why did such a notorious war criminal never stand trial? Those questions still linger, shrouded in the same fog that marked his final days. In 1960, at the Altshausen Cemetery, 15 years after the end of the war, German forensic investigators exhumed the body attributed to Oskar Dirlewanger. The official goal was to confirm his identity and close pending legal proceedings. The report described the skeleton of a male, estimated to be about 65 years old. Although Dirlewanger was 49 when he died, malnutrition and injuries can accelerate skeletal aging. Pathologists found extensive skull fractures, broken ribs, and severe facial trauma consistent with a violent beating, not natural causes. The dental analysis was decisive. The teeth matched military medical records from the 1940s, and other elements, such as height and previously documented old fractures, confirmed the identification. The final report was clear. The remains belonged to Oskar Dirlewanger and confirmed what witnesses had been saying for years. He did not die of natural causes. The bones revealed a death marked by extreme violence. There is a dark irony in that ending. The man responsible for the beating and extermination of tens of thousands of civilians met a similar end. For some, that represents poetic justice. For others, a historical failure. Dirlewanger should have faced a formal tribunal. After the identification, the remains were buried again in an undisclosed location. His grave remains unknown, far from any cult or glorification. How should his end be judged? Justice, or just another chapter of violence? And what does his trajectory reveal about the dangers of legitimizing cruelty as an instrument of power? The story of Oskar Dirlewanger remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of Nazi crimes. While many war criminals hid behind ideology or obedience to higher orders, Dirlewanger seemed driven by pure sadism. Historians estimate that the Dirlewanger Brigade was responsible for the deaths of at least 30,000 civilians in documented operations, a number that is likely even higher. In Warsaw, its actions during the Wola Massacre rank among the most brutal war crimes of the Second World War. What makes the case particularly disturbing is that even other Nazis recognized his monstrosity. Reports from the Wehrmacht and the SS themselves expressed shock at his methods. Even so, the regime continued to employ him, revealing how totalitarian systems normalize the unacceptable when it serves their purposes. The central question remains: how a convicted criminal, despised even by his peers, was given military authority to commit atrocities on a large scale. The answer reveals something essential about the Third Reich, a system that not only committed evil, but deliberately armed the worst elements of society and unleashed them against the defenseless. Historian Timothy Snyder argues that units like the Dirlewanger Brigade represent the final collapse of any moral or legal limit, created to carry out tasks that even ideologically indoctrinated soldiers hesitated to perform. The end of Oskar Dirlewanger, beaten to death by Polish survivors, raises ethical dilemmas about justice and revenge. Should he have been formally tried, or does his death represent a raw yet understandable form of justice? The exhumation in 1960 closed the case in legal terms, but his legacy endures as a memory of the communities that were destroyed and a warning of how far humanity can fall when cruelty is institutionalized. Dirlewanger's brigade was not an isolated aberration, but an extreme and logical expression of Nazism's core principles: dehumanization and the glorification of violence. If this story made you reflect on how totalitarian regimes not only allow, but actively cultivate human monsters, share it so that we never forget. The story of Oskar Dirlewanger is not just about a criminal. It is a warning about what happens when societies legitimize violence and reward cruelty. What does he symbolize? The human capacity for absolute evil when it is freed from moral and legal restraints, something that remains relevant in any era. His anonymous grave may be hidden, but the lessons it leaves behind must remain visible so that such horrors are never repeated. If you enjoyed this story, write the phrase, "I want more stories," in the comments. It only takes a second, and it helps our video reach more people. You might even get pinned in the comments, showing that you were here. And don't forget to show your support by clicking the like button and subscribing just below. That helps us know we're on the right track. Now, check out the video appearing in your recommendations. See you next time.